Life continues Wednesday at 9 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
Palm to palm on a pilgrimage in an hour. First, man's not born to rest, and that's why we have the garden.
Hello and welcome to Gardener's World. It's lovely, isn't it, just to be back outside. And there is actually some warmth in that sun. You're looking at my little wildflower patch, do you remember? Lovely turf all the way around the edges and slightly unkept in the middle. The bulbs have come and gone, so I've got Iris reticulata and the early crocus. And the wildflower in reality is probably not gonna come until May, early June. So I've got this sort of gap, and that's where the primulas come into play. Got the cowslip, which will grow absolutely anywhere, so I've not put many of those in. They'll seed around and they'll be fine. But it's this, the oxlip. This is the experiment. In reality, I'm pushing my luck, because normally they grow in the woodland, in the damp conditions, and obviously I'm a little bit drier, but there is areas in this lawn that definitely hold the moisture. Now, coming up on today's programme.
There you go.
Joe meets a passionate grower bringing a bounty of Italian produce to Birmingham.
So I'm kind of trying to make them brummy.
I thought you were going to say perform better. Turning your little bean into a Brummie. Oh, hang on. Oh, yeah, it's got a Brummie accent.
We meet a head gardener in Somerset who, at the age of 25, looks after 2 arts and crafts gardens.
The perception of head gardeners as sort of an older guy in a flat cap and a big beard, but I often find that if I talk to someone, they quickly learn that I can at least give the impression I know what I'm talking about.
Harriet visits a garden designed as a living painting more than 100 years ago.
This is Charleston, and it's a place brimming full of ideas and creativity, and you can really feel the energy here.
And I will be starting a new woodland area and getting some veg going. This is an area of the garden that sits just behind the gravel garden. If I take you back to January when I came out to start on it, it was an overgrown mess. Lots of Euphorbia robbii covering the space, 2 medlars, really overgrown. The first thing I did was lifted the canopies and freed up all this space underneath, and then I reduced the tops a little bit. So when you're down the bottom there now and you look up into the garden, you get these wonderful layers. Then there was a void in the middle, and so I've put a Cornus controversial, which will just pop up in this gap. And now, coming down a layer, it's all about the shrubs. So I've got some roses, hydrangea, and now it's just getting in the last few. What I've done is just mounded the soil up and round, top of a gas tank that supplies the house, which I've obviously got to leave access to. So you're never going to hide it from above, but at least when I'm looking through the planting, you won't see it. So this one is a little bit of a wild card. It's something I've never grown before. So it's Hellwingia chinensis. And a mate of mine grows it locally, and though it says a sheltered position, his has been absolutely fine for the last 5-6 years. The bit that fascinated me was, would you believe, though the flowers are not absolutely stunning, they appear about there on the leaf. So they actually come out of the leaf. happy in semi-shade. Probably get up to about just over a metre. If I just do that, imagine that just in a soft breeze. It was absolutely stunning. It's wonderful, isn't it, when you come across a plant that is just a little bit different. So the next one will be a plant that lots of us know, but not necessarily variety-wise. So this is Sagakaka, which is the Christmas box, but this one's called Dragon's Gate. Same sort of white creamy flower, but the others have a black berry. This one has a red berry. But on top of that, I've seen one at full growth, and the thing that I loved was its habit. Whereas some of the others can be quite upright and strong, this is quite sort of soft and relaxed and more or less creates like a layered dome. Scent-wise, not quite as strong as the other Sagakocks that you'll buy. And the last one here is Deutzia. Been around a long time. Comes sort of end of May, has got wonderful pinky flower and it gets absolutely covered. And the shrub layer is not only going to give interest right throughout the year, but also it provides good habitat. The wildlife absolutely love it. So they will now get a really good water in, and then in a few weeks' time, I'm going to put through all the herbaceous planting. Last summer, Arit went to visit a fascinating garden with a very colourful backstory.
Hidden away in the Sussex South Downs is a house and garden steeped in cultural history. This is Charleston, and it's a place which has been brimming full of ideas and creativity for over a century, and you can really feel the energy here. In 1916, Charleston became the home and studio of artists Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant. They were part of the infamous Bloomsbury Group, a circle of radical creatives from London who had liberal ideas and lifestyles. When they arrived, the garden was filled with fruit trees and vegetables, but after being redesigned in 1918, a rectangular lawn, gravel paths and flower beds were created. The garden became their canvas and they filled it with the flowers they loved to paint, which Vanessa alluded to in a letter she wrote in 1936. One result of the rain we've had is that when the sun does come out, everything seems deliciously fresh. The garden is now a mass of flowers with hollyhocks, sweet peas and zinnias. I wander about in it at odd moments for the pleasures of the sights and smells. You can really see how the garden fed these artists, how Duncan and Vanessa could come out and draw inspiration out of this garden, whether it was the colour palette, whether it was taking vignettes of the planting combinations and painting them, even in their sculpture work. There's a painterly quality through the home and through this garden so that there is almost no discernment between what's inside and what's outside. Today, keeping the spirit of Charleston alive is head gardener Harry Hoblin. It must be a huge privilege, but such a responsibility looking after this garden.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose I'm increasingly seeing my role in this garden as kind of like a guiding hand who's inherited this legacy and continue adapting to changing conditions as well, whilst also paying great homage to the original spirit and ethos of this garden.
I love the wildness of it and that feeling of annuals that jostle up against perennials. And as much as it kind of looks as if it's wild, I'm sure there's quite a lot of work that still goes into the garden.
Yeah, it's an artist's garden, so it's supposed to be alive and popping with colour, and she talks in some of her letters about hollyhocks and dahlias growing through the fruit trees. This medley, I suppose, is perhaps the right word for it. But that does allow me to experiment with self-seeding. Most of the hollyhocks you can see in this garden have self-sown, and it's really just a case of editing out things that maybe you don't seem appropriate.
The pressures on gardening is really difficult now, isn't it, with sustainability? How are you managing that here?
Considering how I can make the planting as resilient as possible is of great importance to me. I've found increasingly that the phlox, they're really thriving in shadier positions. And then in those sunnier spots, perhaps I'm looking to introduce newer plants that can tolerate those drier conditions. You know, I don't think I've had the sprinklers on once this season, and it's actually much more important, I think, to be watering, if necessary, plants at the base. But actually that, for me, is still a sort of secondary measure to the most important thing, perhaps, if you're growing, you know, plants that like a rich, fertile soil, which is obviously mulching. So I produce most of my own compost here on site and try and do a thick mulch layer in late winter and early spring.
Harry has a number of different compost heaps spread around the garden at Charleston, and he's proud of his sustainable recipe.
This is what us compost enthusiasts call compost cakes. This is kind of a slower composting process whereby, I guess just like a cake, you're kind of layering up different materials. This has got a mixture of brown materials, which might be sort of dried hay, wood chip, and then also greener materials, so food waste, fresh grass clippings, which are obviously rich in nitrogen.
Yeah.
So I think I used to perhaps buy in more compost onto the site, but increasingly I want to be creating my own compost, reducing, reusing and recycling as much as possible.
Harry also builds dead hedges around the site using twigs and woody prunings from the garden. They reduce the need for bonfires and, perhaps more importantly, provide a useful habitat for wildlife. Look at this.
So this is kind of the final stage of my sort of composting process. But I felt like through the growing season, the best thing to do would perhaps be to plant some squashes into them. Squash is obviously like a sort of rich soil, both rich in nutrients and sort of moisture retention qualities. So putting them in, you know, your final stage of composting heap makes the most sense. They haven't had any water other than obviously nature's rain.
Wow, that's
so it's nice to have them scrambling over the walls into the walled garden.
Coming to a place like this is so exciting. You don't know what you're going to see because it changes all the time. I love how all of the self-seeding is allowed so that you get this really extra layer of creativity coming through the borders. And that takes confidence to be able to allow that to happen. That allows the garden to breathe, whilst you're also able to kind of interject with a little bit of styling and a little bit of editing. That's the creative part of this garden that really makes it feel very, very special. What do you think Vanessa and Duncan would make of your sustainable input into the garden, your ethos of gardening?
I think they'd be very much in accordance with it. I mean, the way that they lived, they were very much people who created, reused and recycled materials. So if you just look on the piazza there at the mosaic, it's all made from broken bits of ceramics. So they very much like to reuse things.
Well, it's nice to think that you'd be allowed to stay.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think so too.
I thought that felt incredibly romantic. But there was one part that made me smile, and it was the squash scrambling about. I do like a runaway squash. But also, my granddad used to grow his marrows exactly the same on top of the compost. Joyous. Last year, I put in this archway and then planted Rosa Malvern Hills, which is this glorious rambler. It repeat flowers, it's sort of soft yellow. And it's getting away now, so I think this year it will get up and over. And then I put up my new sparrow box. So I'm hoping I'm going to get some visitors. But the thing that was bugging me is this wall. In the morning, this is east facing, and the light bounces off here and it just doesn't feel right. So what I want to do is I'm going to put a wall shrub against here just to soften the whole area. But instead of putting up trellis, what I do is just use these horizontal wires. I start normally about 450 mil from the ground and then repeat as we go up. And what I've done is drilled some holes on the horizontal. Probably got about 1 metre between each. So once I've drilled the holes, got the raw plugs in, it's just a matter of putting these vine eyes in, which is just a little screw, little galvanised eye at the end. They're brilliant for these sort of jobs. Tighten those up with a pair of pliers, but you could also do it with a screwdriver. And then what I'm going to do with this one, just leave that at the moment like that, so it runs with the line of the wire. Now we're going to pull our wire through. So the galvanised wire is about 2 mil. And then all we're doing now is threading through the eyes and then hook over here, tension, bend it over. Going to wind that wire as tight as you can back around. Last little trick, all right, just to get that final tension. All we're going to do at each end is now take that, give it a little twist and tighten it up. So there you go. We are now ready to plant the wall shrub. But before that, it's now time for one of your films.
Hello, I'm Matt and welcome to my allotment. I thought I'd show you around.
I've had this plot in St Werburgh's for 2 years, having inherited it from my mother. My mum had been working this land for 15 years but died during lockdown due to cancer and left this allotment to me. I had never done any gardening at all up until 3 years ago, at which point my mum asked me if I'd like to help her manage the site. She was struggling to maintain it as her health was deteriorating. Since she passed away, I've been learning to garden and have found the allotment the perfect place to come and relax and reflect. On my plot, I have been lucky enough to inherit a really established strawberry bed alongside raspberries and red currants and gooseberries, which I've left intact and kept maintaining. As for the rest of the plot, I decided to strip it right back and start from scratch. I knew exactly what was what. I was given some great advice early on with my allotment to grow what I eat. I love cooking, and for me every meal seems to start with onions and garlic, so I planted lots of this. I don't want to just grow veg up here, so I've dedicated a few beds to support pollinators. I've planted cosmos, snapdragons, triplet lilies, poppies, gladioli and sunflowers in large thickets. I love sitting next door to the flower beds and watching the insects congregate around the flowers. As my wife owns a cafe and coffee roasters, I'm lucky enough to have access to a byproduct of the process called chaff. Chaff is the husk of the green coffee bean, which is removed during the roasting process and is an amazingly nutrient-rich source of mulch. I use the chaff in allotment to conserve water and suppress weeds, and have a suspicion that slugs absolutely hate it. It's amazing to have access to this byproduct, as it both supports and benefits the calf and the allotment. I think my mum would be amazed and delighted about what I've done in this small plot of urban land, and I've loved learning and developing a passion for gardening.
I hope you enjoyed looking at my little plot here in Bristol.
You coming? There we go. Good boy. I thought that film was absolutely lovely, and Matt, I'm just so pleased that you have found gardening. And please keep sending your films in, because we love them. All the information is on the website. So, wires are on and the wall's ready to go. This is what's going in. And I'm going to be honest with you now. I saw this plant years ago growing against the wall. I thought it was a fuchsia. It's got that fuchsia flower. And then I got closer, thought actually it can't be, because the leaves look like gooseberries, and then did a little bit of research, and it's a ribes. So it's a flowering currant, Ribes speciosum. and it's a cracking plant, and it's got quite vertical growth. So what I was thinking, with that growth, I can arch it and shape it here. So what I did was took out an area of paving. I mean, it would have been easy just to get a pot, pop it in, but when it comes to trees and shrubs, if you can get them in the ground, get them in the ground, because they're always going to be happier. Dug out a whole load of hardcore, and then I've made a soil mix. Soil's from the front garden. I've put my own compost in it. I've put a little bit of manure in it, and then some grit. So we're going to put a little bit of that in the hole. And I suppose if you think what this plant loves, it loves sort of sun, semi-shade. So you might want to, if you're going to have a go at this, put gloves on, because it is rather prickly. And then once we get it roughly in place, I'll take this cane out and then see what it's like shape-wise. Got 3 sort of main stems. Height-wise, it'll grow to about 2 metres. There we go. I think it'll form really nicely. And actually, it's not just the spring flower. I think the stem colour on this plant is stunning. And the gloss of those leaves will really ping against that wall. So we'll work that in. That will settle itself down after a good water. Now really, all I've got to do is to tie that in. I tie a knot around the wire so that when I do tie in, the plant's never going to rub against that wire. You know, you look at those flowers and they're long and you think, how does anything pollinate that? Well, this plant originates from Mexico and California, and it's pollinated by hummingbirds. So out there it will fruit. I've never seen it fruiting over here. Now, we're off to meet a head gardener in his 20s, and he doesn't just look after one garden, but he looks after 2.
At the start of the day, the first thing I'll do is come in and just have a quick look around the garden. Just have a look what's looking good, what's looking not so good. It's still nice and cool, nice and light. You hear the birds song and get to see the garden before anyone else does. My name's Sam Hickmott. I'm the head gardener at Lightscary Manor and Tinsenall Garden in Somerset. I'm in quite a unique position. At 25, I believe, I'm the youngest head gardener in the National Trust, which is quite an unusual feat. The perception of head gardeners as sort of an older guy in a flat cap and a big beard. So it throws people off at the start, but I often find that if I talk to someone, they quickly learn that I can at least give the impression I know what I'm talking about. We'll just start off taking out all of these alliums. So we'll just dig around them quite carefully, try and keep the bulbs intact, and then after that we'll plant out a couple of rows of these nice sunflowers. So after having a quick look around the garden, I then meet up with the team, just have a quick chat about what's going on for the day. For example, today we were talking about planting out in the cut flower garden, what we need to remove and what we need to place out. I keep thinking those sunflowers are looking a bit tired in their pots, so if sooner we get them into the ground, the better, I think. Lightscary Manor is a family home that's been home to 2 really key families over the last 500 years. The first is the Lights family, from where it gets its name. Most notably, Henry Light lived here and wrote the New Herbal, which is a significant botanical text, about 500 years ago. And then at the turn of the 20th century, the house was bought by the Jenner family, who really created most of the garden that we see today. There's definitely a real weight of responsibility that comes with the job. These gardens have been here for 100 years, and they've been managed well for that time. It's partly how do we make these spaces better, but also how do we continue on with that legacy. So this is the Apostle Garden. This is one of the first areas that a visitor would come into the garden. It takes its name from these big topiary structures, that being 12 of them, with the connection of the chapel, they were named the Apostles. One of the things that I noticed this morning was that under these guys we just needed a little bit of weeding just to keep on top of them. But really, the key focus here is the renovation of these apostles. The current apostles are about 1 metre 2 tall. They should be basically the size of a person, and some of these are sort of 8-9 feet. We took the decision to cut them back to the rough shape they should be and allow them to regenerate from there. But they should also have round tops rather than pyramidal tops, in my opinion. So this is the main border, and this is really the centrepiece of the garden. It's a 50-metre long mixed border. It's first laid out by Graham Stuart Thomas in the 1960s. While it's looking really good at the moment, all of the flowers are just coming into their prime. It's not quite as it should be. Graham Stuart Thomas laid it out in a colour spectrum of soft blues and yellows through to pinks, purples, and then finally reds at the far end. But unfortunately, it's lost some of that in time. However, that's a job for another day because we've got to get going. So there's often a fair bit of shuttling going on between both sites. You know, I try and stay a day at a time at each place, but often life gets in the way a little bit. I've become very familiar with this small bit of the A303. It's, yeah, you drive it quite a lot, but really it's all just another day in the office. Sentinel is a small 2-acre garden that's been developed over the last 100 years or so. It's a really small and intimate space laid out in garden rooms, much within the style of the arts and crafts garden. Often each of these garden rooms have different sort of feelings or colour schemes. So as you walk through each room, you get a different feeling and a different gardening style. Actually, if you want to go on the other side of the path there.
Okay.
I'm really lucky here. I have a really great team that don't take very much management, knowledgeable right from an apprentice through to senior gardener. So everyone has something different to bring and a different outlook on both gardens. So I don't know if anyone's got any suggestions for what we could replace some of that Artemisia with on the right-hand side.
It's not really having the side effect of being actual hot
No.
when you look at it. I mean, I love the foxgloves.
When I first arrived in the garden in 2021, this whole kitchen garden was just covered over completely. We didn't have anything much growing in it at the time, so our first priority was really to get it back up and running again. And now this year, in our second year, we're full of lovely cut flowers and vegetables that are really coming on well. We've just got some beans here that we're looking to protect from a resident rabbit who's turned up recently. We've evicted him and ensured that he can't get back in again. But just as a little bit of insurance, we're making sure that everything's going to thrive and grow really well. So I think as much as every gardener leaves an impact on a garden, I think that gardens reciprocate. And really to get them under your skin in such a deep way, I don't think that's something you ever quite get rid of. And I think whatever happens, I'll always look back on both of these gardens really, really fondly.
I have spent years trying to encourage young people to come into the gardening world. So to see someone like Sam absolutely flying is wonderful for me. Last October, I containerised a lot of bulbs, some daffs, crocuses, irises, and also the Camasias. So the daff you can see in front of you is called Elka, and it's doing its business, but then that'll move on. And I think come May, there'll just be a slight void before the wildflower starts to sing. So what I want to do is plant these Camasias. So this one's called Blue Candle. It'll get to about 70 centimetres. And interestingly, the Camasias normally like damper conditions, but as long as I give this a little bit of TLC, keep an eye on it through the first growing season, next year it deals with those slightly dry conditions. So I'm not worried too much about cutting through the wildflower because it's seeded around from last year and it'll be absolutely fine. Acamassia come from North America. Originally, they were an important food source, so it's quite nice. You've got these going through the meadow and the edibles behind you. Hey, look at that. I containerised that in October, put it to one side, watered it in and left it. And now, great plant. Also, I saved myself a few bob. Do you know, it's absolutely lovely. Just getting back out in the garden. Hands in the soil, a little bit of planting. I can actually smell that soil. That's what it's all about. What I'm going to do now is give those a really good watering and keep an eye on it all the way through this season. And I think, come May, that flower will be singing its little heart out. Still to come on today's programme. Joe meets a grower bringing a taste of Italy to Birmingham.
There's something about, you know, just being surrounded by the ingredients that have gone straight into the pot. And now we're eating it fresh and, you know, enjoying the whole sort of Italian vibe, as it were.
Good.
It's really inspirational.
And we visit a couple who are hooked on hostas.
They come in the most amazing variety of colours.
The sizes, tiny ones, as big as that, to giant ones.
Big enough to swallow your lawnmower.
Yes.
It's great big macho hostas.
So, raspberry time. Actually, to be fair, it's getting to the back end of the season for bare root raspberries. And what I've done first of all is soak them for a good couple of hours so they're nice and wet. If you can still get them, that's exactly what you're going to get. As the season goes on, you can buy containerised raspberries. So as far as this sort of soil is concerned, I made sure that we've got no perennial weed, and then I introduced an awful lot of organic matter. For me, that was well-rotted manure. And then after that, I did feel that it was still a little bit claggy. So then I started introducing some horticultural grit, because these plants, they love well-drained soil and also a sunny little spot. So this wall actually faces west, which is spot on. These are actually called Autumn Bliss. They're a really good, reliable raspberry. They grow up, they then fruit on that first season's growth, and then all you have to do back end of the year is cut them back down to the ground. When it comes to planting them, I'm going to put them about 45 centimetres apart. You can see where these are starting to shoot. So I'm going to make sure that point is at least 10 centimetres into the ground. So when it comes to the autumn raspberries, I don't think it's just the simplicity of pruning that attracts me to them. It's the timing of that fruit and whether they're fresh off the bush or you make jams to carry you into the winter. I think raspberries are a classic British crop, but every now and then it's just lovely to mix it up a bit. Well, that's what Joe found out in Birmingham.
For me, allotments are what it's all about. They're community-orientated, packed full of wonderful fruit and veg, as well as ornamentals, and of course, brilliant people too.
So when I heard about an allotmenteer who has a penchant for growing and cooking Italian fruits and veg on his plot, I didn't need asking twice. Matthew O'Callaghan fell in love with all things Italian through An Italian Ex and became obsessed with growing produce that allowed him to cook with the authentic flavours of Italy.
Matt, buongiorno.
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 Ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Beautiful Belotti beans you got there.
Yeah, they're good.
Oh, they're gorgeous.
So these are one of the best beans. You cook them like this, just boil them up with some olive oil, some garlic. Perfect. You sow them in March, April.
Yeah.
Treat them like runner beans, and then you shell them when they start to dry. So we leave some of them on to dry.
Yeah.
Store them over the winter so we can keep eating them. Some of them I'll eat now.
Will you show me around the plot?
Yeah, of course.
Fantastic.
So I grow loads of different types of chicories,
Yep.
or chicoria, which all start out looking identical, which makes it really difficult when you forget to put the labels in. So this
That's
one...
day one on gardening courses.
Yeah,
Put the labels in and the date.
Yeah, but then you take the labels out, and then, yeah. Anyway, so this one looks like a giant lettuce. It's actually palla rossa, which means red ball. So although it's green at the moment, as the nights draw in and it starts to get colder, so it switches the pigment to a red, which is more efficient.
And that's when they're ready to eat. But they're quite bitter, aren't they?
Yeah, bitter is a big thing in Italy, but they treat them in a way to make them delicious. So with this, I make a risotto. So this is my favourite bean variety, which is from Lucca in Tuscany, and they're called peacock beans.
They're lovely pods, aren't they?
Yeah,
Golden.
they've got a really long growing season, so I start these off in March inside, and then you can see they're only just getting going now. And also, when you cook them, they double in size, they swell up, so that, I mean, like, in terms of nutrients and protein, what you're getting a lot of bang for your buck.
Yeah.
What I do with these is, each year, I pick the ones that ripen earliest, use those for next year. So I'm kind of trying to make them brummy, I guess.
I thought you were going to say perform better. You're turning your little bean into a brummy with an accent. Oh, hang on. Oh, yeah, it's got a brummy accent. Yeah, these cardoons, which, I mean, they're a fantastic ornamental garden plant.
They're brilliant.
But you don't eat the fruits.
Those are just for the bees. They just finished, but they look, you can see the purple, they look like an artichoke.
Yeah.
But it's the species, if you like, of artichoke that was then taken and cultivated to make it edible.
Tasty.
But you can eat part of the leaf. So after it's flowered, it sends up this new growth, so that's going to be next year's growth. What you can do is wrap cardboard around it, so that makes it more tender. It's the same way you do this, like earthing up celery.
Yeah.
And then in the winter, you just take out the central rib and then batter it and deep fry it. And then that's street food in Palermo.
Oh, you stop it. You're really making me peckish now. I see you got some tomatoes.
Yep.
Really nice looking tomatoes growing in
Got
there.
some special tomatoes.
Quick, get out before you fry.
Oh, there you go. Pomodoro.
What a beautiful little thing, isn't it?
Pianello di Vesuvio. So it means the hanging tomato of Vesuvius.
Lovely. So the perfect little fruit, isn't it?
The thing that's special about them is that they have a really thick skin. So the way that you use these is you air dry them. So you gather them when they've all harvested. You make them into a cluster, like a bunch of grapes. And then you air dry them somewhere dry. And then as they start to dry out, they become really concentrated. You kind of cook them, and then you just smear it over bread, like a bruschetta.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Wow.
So, but yeah, these are beautiful. And so I've sent these out to other people. So there's now this little network of people in the UK growing these tomatoes that supposedly only grow on the slopes of Vesuvius.
Well, Matt said I might get to eat something later. I didn't realise it was DIY, to be honest. So here, in true cookery style, I've got some tomato, garlic, and chilies all mixed together, going in some beautiful olive oil. Matt, What happens next? What do I do?
Oh. Next, you go and get some more ingredients.
For his chosen dish, Matt needs some of this wonderful tromboncino squash, but not, it seems, the fruit.
We want the whole top of the plant, the tenerumi.
The whole thing?
Yeah. So
Sorry. Sorry.
So what we're making is a dish called pasta con tenerumi.
Con tenerumi.
And the tenerumi are the leaves of
with
that
with
squash.
tenerumi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we want to cut them into strips, but just take out this central thing.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers. No, people don't really eat this in Britain. I've never heard of it before. Or would, you know, if you go to an Italian restaurant, I don't think I've even seen it.
It's very much, you know, domestic.
Fresh ingredients, ready to go.
Picked minutes ago.
Picked minutes ago.
And then the tomato,
yeah,
you just put it on top.
Looks amazing.
There you go.
Thank you very much. Right, here goes. That is really good. Oh, it is quite spicy. I love it. But there's something about, you know, just being surrounded by the ingredients that have gone straight into the pot. And now we're eating it fresh and, you know, enjoying it and the company and the whole sort of Italian vibe, as it were.
Good.
It's really inspirational. I have to say, it's made me want to go home and try planting different stuff, try things out, and just broaden my horizon as far as the things I grow and eat.
Get seeds from people.
And get seeds from people.
Yeah.
Well, I need to have a word with you about that.
I can give you some tomato seeds.
Nice, now we're talking. Delicious. Mm.
Matthew inspired me. I love Belotti beans, going into autumn and then putting them in a minestrone soup. I've got about a 9 centimetre pot, filling it up, peat-free compost, a couple of little taps, and these are quite big seeds. They want to go in at roughly about 5 centimetres. So I'm going to make 3 little holes, nice and simple, and then just pop them in. We have a bit of a thing in our house. Mrs. Frost thinks they look gorgeous, so she puts them in wonderful glass containers and then gets very irritated when I start using them. And then all I do is just top the pot up, and that's it. Do a second one. What do you want, eh? No, I tell you, hey, animals, it's just starting to rain. So the dog, being the dog, doesn't mind at all. Probably thinks it can eat the Belotti beans, but Ash has gone and sat in the greenhouse and just looking at us as if we're a little bit crackers. So I think Ash is probably brighter than you, darling, eh? Anyway, water them, put them in the greenhouse, and they will grow on. And when it comes to planting out, they probably reach up to about 2 metres. So I'll grow them up a little obelisk, but you could make, you know, a wigwam from some canes. And I'll probably put these out back end of May, early June. What you're doing is you're thinking about the last frost. When you plant them out, well-prepped soil, plenty of organic matter, and come the back end of the summer, you will be picking the Belotti beans. So the next job is potting up these, and I do love a hosta, but Richard and Sue Proctor from West Yorkshire take that to a whole new level.
They are the easiest and most forgiving plants to look after. We are actually captivated by them. It's awful, addicted, I think. We've got over 400 planted out in the garden. What is there not to like about hostas? They come in the most amazing variety of colours.
And sizes and colours. The infinite variety of leaf shape, tiny ones, as big as that, to giant ones.
Big enough to swallow your lawnmower.
Yes.
It's great big macho hostas.
I've got a favourite hosta which I would take on my desert island. It's Liberty. And it's stately and grows up. It doesn't flop whatever the weather. It's just gorgeous.
I think mine's Liberty as well, but if I had to choose another one, I think it would be Rainbow's End.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think Rainbow's End is a stunner. That would be my favourite.
It's the first one that we see when we come home and
Yes,
come into the
it's
drive,
in
isn't
the drive,
it?
yes.
We start dividing about April, don't we?
Yes.
When we can see the new buds coming up, and then usually wash it so we can see where the roots are, and then we slice it up.
Just go through the crown, and then you can often just ease it apart to break the crown and not touch the roots.
We don't divide after the end of July,
Yeah.
because they need to get a good root ball established before winter.
Yes.
We're both very much drawn to the miniature hostas because they're so unusual. Everybody should have a blue mouse ears. There's about 70 or 80 different mice, but blue mouse ears is the parent of them all. It doesn't grow much higher, but it'll go to at least a foot in diameter. And because of its thicker leaves, it's fairly slug resistant. I can't think of any years where we've had blue mouse ears attacked by slugs or snails. It grows in the shade, it grows in the sun, it grows in pots, in the open ground. Everybody ought to have blue mouse ears in the garden.
Yes, hostas will grow in sun. There are a large number of them which will be a different colour in sun and shade. There are very few hostas which will be identical, so that maybe a hosta in full sun will have a gold centre, but in the shade it will have a two-tone dark centre, dark green, dark blue. So is that hosta sun tolerant? Well, if you like it in sun and you like it in shade, yes, you can buy the same hosta twice, or you can divide it, put one in sun, one in shade, and you've got the equivalent of two different hostas.
So what we're saying really is that hostas cope with sun, but ideally they'd like some shade.
There are some hostas which look best in a lot of sun, and those are the ones that it needs the sun to bring the variegation out, the streaking out in the hosta. I mean, there are very few hostas which will take 12 hours a day sun if your garden is dead flat and there is no shade whatsoever.
Listening to that, Richard, I'd quite like to grow hostas. I think I'm going to have a go.
Haven't you got enough? Slugs are always a problem. The first main way of dealing with them is a torch. Go out at night and find them. The second thing is you can attract them to something that is not a hosta, and that's where beer traps come in. This is a windbreak netting, but you can just as easily use material from tights or landscape fabric, anything that water can get through. Pop a piece of this in your pot before you put the compost in, and then the slugs will find it very difficult to climb up through the hole and through the inside wall of the pot. The last thing, I wish I'd brought a hedgehog and a frog with me, because perhaps one of the most important ways of getting rid of slugs and snails is to cultivate a good wildlife garden.
I went to bed last night hating hostas. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. The part of hosta growing I like best, I really, really enjoy, is hybridising. And all that means is taking the pollen from the anther of one and putting it on to the stigma of another one. And then I put a label on, and leave it. And in about 6 weeks, the pod will have formed, and inside the pod, if you split it open, there'll be lots of little black seeds. You sow them like any other seed, and we get some new hostas. They'll be unique hostas that you've grown.
So it is one of the joys of hybridising, choosing names. It's
great
wonderful.
fun, great.
There's a hosta called Striptease, which has bred all sorts of sports and offspring, as it were.
Big family.
We've got Risky Business, Hanky Panky, Yellow Polka Dot
Moulin
Bikini.
Rouge.
And for Trekkies, we can do you Captain Kirk, Enterprise, Vulcan, Dilithium Crystal.
Why do you like hostas, Richard?
Well, what is the not to like about hostas? We call them plants with personality because you never quite know what they're going to do next, how they're going to come up from one season to the next.
Oh, we're totally mad and bonkers, yeah. Because we're still growing them after 50-odd years. But it's just such fun, it really is. Every day with hostas, it's different, isn't it?
It is.
One of the things that I really love about gardening is that you can generalise, potter around, create your own little space, but also the amount of people that just specialise and that passion for hostas. And I know a lot of people will be sat there saying, yeah, but that's all right, but what about the snails and the slugs? Well, to be fair, when we moved into the house, there was Devon Green planted just down in the front border. Lovely hosta, dark green leaves. The first year got absolutely mullered. So I really love growing them, but I only tend to grow them in pots. And that seems to work for me. I've got a couple here that I'm going to add to the collection. But one of the tips that I loved was that with the nylon. So we're going to give that a go. Instead of crock at the bottom, I'm going to place the nylon there and I'm going to hold it in place with the mix. When it comes to the mix, we've got topsoil in here, we've got peat-free compost, and the last thing that I add is a little bit of just composted bark. And now when you sort of really pick that up, you know it's going to hold the moisture in. So once we've done that, I'm going to put 3 plants in here, which I know seems slightly extravagant, but I want there to be a big show. So we're going to work that in. Also, what about the beer traps? I still can't get my head around, honestly. Pouring good beer into a trap, that one's not for me. I think the reality is as well, is finding something that works for you. Because you talk to gardeners and everybody's got a take on it. And for me, it's about balance. And the last thing that I do is just dress with a bit of grit. So, twofold really. It shows everything off, but I do think it deters them a little bit. One of the most exciting moments in the garden last year was the girls coming home from a night out and then running in and saying, I've just seen 2 hedgehogs on the path. And you think, yes, you're creating a garden that works. Hello, young man. That and the birds coming in. It's a shame, really, you can't teach your cat, can you? Just to, you know, maybe catch a few slugs or snails. You won't do that, will you? No, you won't. There we go, young man. So next, we're just going to put a single one in. Nylon goes in, fill that up with compost. I know a lot of us, the snails and the slugs get to us, but I think we forget that some of them play an important role in our gardens. You know, there's an awful lot of them are more interested in your compost heap and digesting that matter than they are going at your plants. This one's called One Man's Treasure, and it's in a biodegradable pot, so you can see the roots are starting to come through. But look at that. The stem colour is absolutely gorgeous. That will really get to about 40 odd centimetres. So I'm just going to do an individual plant, work that in. So all I'm going to do now is give those a little water. They'll go straight into a sort of semi-shady spot. I like to keep mine out of the midday sun. My pot, my gravel on top, hopefully will deter the slugs and the snails. But as I said, I think it's all about balance. Excited is an understatement. I need to show you this. Look, I planted it last year, the magnolia, and it is really doing its business. Look how many buds there are to come on that. Obviously, all I'm praying for now is that we don't have a late frost. But even more impressive, look down there. So that's Delphinium recuenii. I first saw that in the south of France, just the side of a road, and it blew me away. Came back, found the seed, but look at the gloss on that leaf. It's sort of Delphinium, but not as you know it. It'll flower, probably about a metre. Lovely sort of mauvey blue flower on it. And you might remember, actually, I was walking around with seeds in my pocket and just sprinkling them around. And I've got a little patch there, and it's spread right the way through the garden. So what I did is I containerised a few. So I dug up the little seedlings, put them in pots, and I'm going to grow those on, and then I'm just going to put them in different places around the garden. So the moral of that story is, always keep a few seeds in your pocket, and when you see an opportunity, you can let them go. And then you get a surprise the following year. Anyway, as I said, I've got a few more that I want to just lift, containerise to plant later on. And while I get on with that, here's a few jobs you could be doing at the weekend. April is the perfect month to get your first lot of beetroot in. And now my soil has warmed up, I can sow it direct. After preparing the ground, make a shallow drill and give it a water. Sprinkle the seed along the row, leaving about 5 centimetres between each one. Then cover and label. To help replace some of the nutrients that have been washed away over the winter, it's worth giving your trees and shrubs a feed. I'm scattering an organic fertiliser over my borders, which should give them everything they need over the coming months. If your garden is anything like mine, the weeds will be romping away by now. And while it's nice to keep a few for the pollinators, I don't want them spread everywhere. In my gravel path, I like to use a hand fork to prise them out, which is important with perennial weeds like plantain. It's a job I like to do little and often, whenever I get a spare 5 minutes. Hello, what are you doing? Eh? Look what I've got with me. Hey, come on you. Well, I'm afraid that is about it from us. I will be back in a few weeks' time. But next week, Monty will be back at Longmeadow, 8 p.m. In the meantime, what do we say? Look after yourselves. Look after yourselves. Bye-bye.